Welcome to Business Over a Brew, the show where we talk business with some of the Riverbend's most interesting and influential business leaders, all while enjoying a nice brew from the Great Rivers Tap and Grill inside the Best Western Premier Hotel in Alton. Today we'll talk to Big Z owner and president Sam Stemm. He'll tell us about the history of the radio station dating back to 1948 and why the people who have worked here have been so important to the radio station and the community. So let's get to it. It's the Business Over a Brew podcast from the Great Rivers Tap and Grill inside the Best Western Premier Hotel in Alton. Welcome to Business Over a Brew. Very special episode this time. Pleased to be joined by the owner of the Big Z and my mentor, Sam Stemm.
Well,
Did you ever think of yourself as my mentor?
No, not really. I have to maybe examine what that all means. I guess that means when you mess something up, it's my fault.
Yeah, well, that's how Sam taught me to do it, is what I usually say. So, well, let's talk a little bit about just the history of the radio station and how you got started at the Big Z.
Well, the history of the radio station, the station went on the air in 1948. It was one of many community AM stations that hit the airwaves on the heels of World War II. And the goal then is, as it is now, and that was to be a resource to serve the community. And so it's been locally owned and operated for all that time, a number of ownership changes along the way. Some of the more well-known owners, a fellow by the name of Ed Palin, who was well known in the community and well known in the broadcasting industry. So through much of the 50s and into the 60s, Mr. Palin was the owner. And then a group called Morel Broadcasting took it over in the early 60s. And that was a group that consisted of Walter Brink, who was the general manager, and then Helen Hamer Walters, who was an on-air personality and a female pioneer in the radio business. There were not many females in radio in the 60s, let alone those who were really the top talent at the station, and she was well known in the community for her talk show. And then the third member of that group was Nick Bono, who was the engineer and also became well known in the community. And they operated the station until it was bought by the Dreith family in 1984. And the way I became involved, actually I worked at WOKZ when it was owned by Morel Broadcasting in the late 70s for about 2 years as the sports director. And I got that job right out of college. They had an opening for a sports director. I had, majored in mass communications at SIUE. I had a desire to do play-by-play, and so, I slipped right into that and loved the opportunity. I then left radio in late 1979. So it was for a couple of years in the late 70s that I was at WOKZ. Went on to do some other things. The Dreith family bought the station in 1984. And in 1987, they were looking for somebody. I had things had not worked out in one of my other jobs. And so I went out and interviewed at the Big Z with the thought that I probably wasn't going to get back into radio, but Louis Dreith had called me and asked me if I'd come in and talk to him. And I walked in the door, and all those memories of how great radio was came flooding back. He offered me the job. I took it. 3 years later, I was given the opportunity to become the general manager, and then a couple of years after that, I had an opportunity to join the ownership group until finally, and I'm trying to remember what year it was, I guess 2004, when I bought out the last of the Dreith family, Clyde Jones, who was a half-brother to Louis and Chuck. And Clyde gave me the opportunity to buy his stock, and I became the sole owner at that point. And I know I've told you this story before. We closed on that deal. I gave Clyde the check, and I walked into the radio station the next day, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? Now I can't even get mad and quit.
Right.
Because how do you quit when you own the place? And so the rest is history. But it's odd, Nick. I never aspired to be a radio station manager nor a radio station owner, and yet, through happenstance, I found myself owning the radio station in my hometown. And you, like me, you know a lot of radio station owners, and there are not very many that own the radio station in their hometown.
Right.
And so, I find myself fortunate being in that position.
Talk a little bit about, I think one of the things that I guess I'm most proud of at the station is where it's come from, where it was. And there were really some moments where it was maybe nip and tuck, whether it was going to make it or not.
Well, yeah, and I think that's true going all the way back to 1948.
Sure.
I think there were times along the way where it was a very difficult business to be in. And, along the way, under my general managership and my ownership, there were times, especially early on when things were really tough, where you wondered how you were going to make the next payroll. But I'm proud to say we always did. Mm-hmm. Because, again, you, like me, you've heard the stories of the stations where, on payday, the employees would be racing to the bank to see who could be the first to cash their checks because they weren't all going to clear. Mm-hmm. So, we never had to worry about that. But it's funny that you asked that question, because I was just thinking the other day about some of the things we take for granted now. One of them being having... And this is kind of inside baseball here, but having a production library, because when I first came to work at the radio station back in the late 70s, there was no such thing. If you wanted to put music behind a commercial, you went and found some music albums, some 33 1/3 albums, and you'd go and see if you could find an instrumental section that was 30 seconds long that you could put behind the commercial. Well, we take it for granted now, and I think all of our employees take it for granted that, if we're producing a commercial, here's this library of music specially cut, to be background music in commercials.
30 seconds.
And we'll just go find one that's just perfect to fit the commercial that we're cutting. And it wasn't always so, And then, of course, the way some of the technology has changed, too, is another story about how things have changed. But, I'm proud to say that here in 2019, the station's on very solid ground. And I'm proud that I reached out to you and brought you aboard as general manager 3 years ago. This is the Mutual Admiration Society, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know which camera I'm supposed to look at.
I was hoping you'd come on and say good things about me. That's really why I had you on.
Well, it was either that or fire you on air, and I didn't think that was the way to do it, So, the station's on strong financial ground. The station is well respected in the community, and that's probably the thing that was the hardest to do, was to gain that respect, because there was a time. Well, I'll give you an example. When I first came to work at the Big Z in 1987, I'd run into people around town. This is my hometown. I'd run into say, "Hey, what are you doing now?" "Oh, I'm working at WBG. W what? What's that?" "Oh, that's the old that WOKZ." And of course, the only thing anybody knew about WOKZ was that was the station you turned on if the weather was bad in the morning to find out if you had to go to school. Otherwise, the general consensus was there wasn't any other reason to listen to that radio station. And I knew that we had turned the corner when a number of years later, I'd be in a line at the grocery store, and I'd say something to the checker, and somebody behind me would say, "I know who you are." It's like, wow, we went from when I told somebody where I worked, they had no idea what it was, to the point where people recognized me because they recognized my voice, which told me, people were listening. And so, that didn't happen overnight. And I don't know how much time you want me to take here, but there were a number of events that really helped kind of turn the tide. One of them, a very sad event, that was the whole Paula Sims ordeal, and the killing of her second daughter, and there was hour-to-hour coverage of that, not only on our station, but every television station and every radio station in St. Louis had people here camping out at the police department and waiting to see what was going to happen. Well, because we're local, we knew people in the police department, we knew people locally, we knew what was going on sometime hours before the St. Louis media knew, and so we became a resource. The second event that really turned people towards the Big Z was the flood of '93. And again, that was so far-ranging in the community, and being able to be a resource for instant, reliable information really caused a lot of people to gain a lot of respect for what it was we were doing. And two things about that flood of '93. One was a letter that I received from a high school classmate that I hadn't seen in years, and a month or so after everything had kind of subsided with the flood, I got this letter in the mail. This was back before people sent email. '93. Right. Nobody knew what email was or text messaging or anything. Back then, people still wrote letters, and I got this letter one day at the radio station. Hey Sam, I haven't seen you in years. I just want to let you know that while the flood was going on, my wife and I started listening to the station to find out, what was going on. Do we need to boil our water? And when the water plant went down, where we had to go to get water and things like that. And he said, I just want to let you know that when the flood ended, we and now we're devoted listeners. We really think, what you're doing for the community is great. Well, that meant so much to me, coming from somebody that I had known, and it's like, okay, finally, we're getting the word out there, and we're turning the corner. But the other thing that did my heart good in the flood of '93 was on the Sunday morning. It was Sunday, August 1st, and the water plant went down, and there was no water in Alton. And, of course, we were on the air with up-to-the-minute updates. Here's what's going on. Here's why you don't have any water. Here's what IEMA, the Illinois Emergency Management Agency, is doing about it. Here's where the water distribution centers are going to be. And about 3 o'clock that afternoon, I got a phone call from my friend. He was my friend, Don Miller, who was the publisher of the Telegraph. And he said, Sam, we're printing an extra this evening, because the Telegraph was a morning paper on Sundays. So we're printing an extra that's going to be on the streets about 5 o'clock. He goes, what would it take to get some ads on the Big Z to tell people that they can go out and buy a newspaper to find out everything that's happened since this morning, which we had been reporting minute by minute. And, of course, they wanted to jump in, but they had to use radio to get the word out. And, of course, I was a nice guy. I didn't double the rates or anything. I sold him ads at rate card, and I went in and cut him myself and had him on the air within about 20 minutes of him calling me. But that did my heart good.
I think the other thing we've done that has certainly enhanced the notoriety of the Big Z in the community has been our high school sports program.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I came to work at the station the second time. I came to work at the Big Z. When I was there in the late 70s, it was WOKZ. And when I came to work in 1987, the Dries had changed the call letters to WBGZ, the Big Z. And, of course, when I was there in the late 70s, the station was an AM and an FM. And the AM signed off at sundown, but the FM stayed on throughout the night. And so we broadcast a lot of high school sports because we had the night signal on the FM. In 1979, they sold the FM. And the high school sports went away because they had to turn the AM off at 6 o'clock in the evening. So, evening basketball games, football games, no signal, no broadcast. So the Dries bought the station in '84. I came to work there in the spring of '87, and that summer, in July of '87, due to some legislation that had passed, it was actually an international treaty that the Reagan administration had signed with Mexico, which allowed the daytime stations to stay on past sundown, and actually to stay on 24 hours a day. So that fall of 1987 was the first time in 8 years that the local radio station in Alton was able to do sports broadcasts in the evening. So we kicked that off. A fella by the name of Chuck Rathert, who had actually preceded me as the sports director at WOKZ back in the 70s, he was back working with us part-time, and he and I worked with Louis Dreeth, and we kind of put everything together. And that fall we kicked off a full schedule of high school football, and then that rolled right into basketball and baseball and softball in the spring. But that was a memorable year in that '87 Marquette football went to the state semifinals, and Roxana went all the way to the state championship game, and we were there documenting that every step of the way. And then that spring, it was kind of odd. You'll appreciate this as the general manager. That spring, we had a 30-game baseball and softball schedule. Not one rainout.
Wow.
There was a drought. That was the spring of '88, and there was a drought. Not one. Every game went along as scheduled. And Chuck and I had told Louis, who was the general manager, said, "Now, we're going to put this schedule together, but you got to be able to pivot here when because a lot of times these games are going to get canceled and have to be rescheduled and all that." Well, we got about 3/4 of the way through the season, and Louis said, "I thought you said this was going to be a real hassle in the spring." It's like, well, it usually doesn't happen this way, and I know it's not happening like that now.
Like that since.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't. But that's, to me, that's one of the things that makes a local radio station valuable to the community. There are some communities where they turn their noses up at high school sports. It's like, oh, well, we don't want to break format. We've got our regular programs on, and we don't want to mess that up. But that's what people are looking for. Growing up, I remember listening to the high school football games with Dwayne Stats doing the play-by-play. Dwayne's now he broadcasts Major League Baseball. He did the Cubs, he did the Yankees, he did the Houston Astros, and he's been with the Tampa Rays for quite a number of years now, and still doing games down there. But Dwayne, an SIUE graduate and a native of East Alton, I believe. I know he went to East Alton Wood River High School.
He was an Oiler for sure.
He was an Oiler for sure, and I'm pretty sure
a lot of great
it was East Alton
broadcasters.
and not Wood River, but I couldn't swear to that. But yes, but the high school sports is that's part of what makes a local radio station local. It's serving the community. It's putting the spotlight on these kids. It's a service to the listeners. I can't tell you how many. I know there are grandmas and grandpas out there that can't get to the games, and they just love, listening. Probably great grandmas and great grandpas in this day and age. And now, with the technology that we have with the streaming, and people can live halfway across the country, halfway across the world, and tune in and hear a nephew or a niece or a grandchild playing high school sports and hearing that play-by-play.
And I think everybody who's ever played a sport has dreamed of being a professional in that sport, and being on the radio kind of makes you feel like that. It gives you that feel of being a professional athlete. When you hear your name on the radio, it's still cool.
Well, over the years we've done so many games, and we have such a full schedule that especially during football season on a Friday night, there might be 4 or 5 local games going on. We can only do one live, and then the rest have to be tape delayed. This day and age, they're not tape delayed; they're digitally delayed. But we still use the term tape delayed. And I always just assumed, everybody wanted to be on live until one Friday night I was doing a game, and I've been doing the Marquette football games since 1987, and actually did some of them back in the late 70s, but continuously since 1987. I got to the stadium, got there early, was down talking to the coaches. One of the kids comes up to me and goes, "Are we on live or are we on tape?" And I said, well, sorry, tonight we're on tape. Oh, good. Because what they like to do, I found out, was they were hoping they were the tape delay game so they could play the game. And then they get together with their buddies and girlfriends and sit and listen to the game to find out whose name got mentioned by the goofy play-by-play guy up there, that old guy up there calling the games.
But one thing I think probably if you had to point to one thing as key to our success at the station, and I think sometimes I just shake my head as how fortunate we are to have the great people working there that we've had for so long.
Yeah, well, it's it is a blessing to have good people, and you've done a lot of these business over a brew broadcasts. You talk to a lot of business people and talking to them with their advertising, and that's probably one of the biggest problems that business owners have, and that is finding good, qualified people to work in their business. And we've been so blessed over the years to have so many dedicated people who bought into the mission. And we don't really have a mission statement, but I think everybody understands what it is.
Right.
I think we talk about it when we hire people, and that is we're here to serve the community. We are a resource for the businesses, for the people, for the institutions in our community. We are here to serve them. We are here to shine a spotlight on everything positive that's happening in the community, and where we see injustice, to shine a light on that too, so that we can try and overcome it. And so when you've got a group of people, and we've had groups of people all the years that I've been involved now. How many years have I been involved? 87. Well, 32 years. Wow. Over those 32 years, there's some have come and gone. A few have been there almost all that time, not quite, but and that's the other thing that I was always proud of, is that we had so many people that have stayed for so long. It was hard to find anybody that hadn't been there for 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 and now 25 years. And then, the other thing is sometimes some of them come back more than once. You did that.
That's right, yeah.
Now I don't know if that was my personal failing and hiring the same people over and over again.
I tricked you twice into hiring me.
But the other thing is, when somebody leaves, goes on and does something else, and then says, hey, I'm willing to come back, or I'd like to come back, that tells you, maybe you're doing something right. But there have been a couple of times, when the station has been honored, or one time I received the Kimmel Award from SIUE, which is a very prestigious award given to business people within the Metro East region, and I was just blown away when I received that award. But when I got up there to make my acceptance speech, which wasn't near as long as these answers that I'm giving here, the thing I tried to get across was that this really isn't my award. This award belonged to all the people who worked at the station. They're the ones down in the trenches. They're the ones that get there at 4 o'clock in the morning and start putting together a newscast or a sportscast. They're the ones that are stay late after their shift. They're the ones that are out calling on advertisers and prospective advertisers, whether it's 100 degrees out or whether it's freezing cold. They're the ones down in the trenches. They're the ones getting it done. They're the ones who are committed to the mission. And it's only through their efforts that somebody thought I was worthy of getting an award. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We've been blessed, and hopefully we'll continue to be blessed in that way.
We're just about out of time, but I wanted to ask you about, obviously in 2015 was a pretty important event for the radio station, adding the FM signal. And
I thought you were going to point out that was the year you came back for the second time.
I guess it actually was.
Yeah,
that's where you thought.
I thought that's where you were going. No, but you're right. It was a huge benefit to the people we serve for us to be able to add the community FM signal, and it's hard to put into words why that's so important, because you really have to go into some detail about what's happened to the AM band. The AM band at one time was very viable. It's much less viable now. And that really all has to do with modern technology. Almost every modern invention over the last 40 or 50 years has denigrated the ability of AM receivers to pick up AM radio signals, be it CFL light bulbs, be it smartphones, be it LED televisions, and on and on and on. All of these things, microwave ovens is another one. Things that everybody has in their household. And it used to be that you could turn on an AM radio and have a clear, crisp signal. That signal went many, many miles further than it does now today. But because of all this modern technology, AM is just becoming less and less viable. And then when you compare it to the technology that's out there, when music started showing up on CDs and was crystal clear, when the FM band came into vogue, and now digital transmission and all that, there are so many other delivery methods that are so crystal clear, and AM isn't. And so given the opportunity, when we had that opportunity, it was a no-brainer for us to, and it was several years of work. It happened in January of 15. January 12th, 2015 is when the Big Z started broadcasting in FM. But we started working on that 3 or 4 years before that, and it culminated in that. And it really was just another example of our commitment to the community going forward. We could have sat there and just said, hey, this is the best we can do on AM. But that wasn't really serving the community the way we want to serve it. We wanted to give them that crystal clear option. And then, of course, what was really heartening to me is probably within the first 2 weeks of us having our signal on FM, I had more than one person tell me I sounded younger on FM. Sure. So I was like, well, if I'd have known that, I'd have done this a long time ago.
Right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for all you've done for the radio station and where you brought it, and probably most important, thanks for giving me the opportunity to be the general manager of my hometown radio station.
Well, it's been my pleasure all around. And jokingly earlier, I said I couldn't really fire you on, but I couldn't fire you off the air either. But it's as I said, it's been a lifelong pleasure to have the opportunity to be the general manager of my hometown radio station. So we at least have that in common. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Thanks for watching the Business Over a Brew podcast. For more video of me drinking free beer with some of the Riverbend's most interesting and influential business leaders, visit AltonDailyNews.com and click on the podcast page. To enjoy a great meal with great food, great service, and great atmosphere, visit Great Rivers Tap and Grill inside the Best Western Premier in Alton. Check out some of their new menu items at GreatRiversTapandGrill.com.